Hello, welcome back to my haunted library. It's Regina. Hope you're doing well. So I just got back from a little trip to Boston with my husband, and I ran into a booktube legend at the Bristol bookstore. I'll talk about that at the end of this video. I did a little vlog, but I really had a good time. I love Boston. I love the vibe. I love the history, and I really had a good time just for a couple of days. So today I'm talking about a couple things. One is, as soon as I got back, I realized it was old school April all over Booktube. I haven't really had time to watch all my favorite Booktubers talking about this, but I'd love to participate in this every year, if only in my own quiet way, because it really is a big readathon, I guess you could call it, a big event in Booktube. Kelsey over at Slime and Slashers, I think I'm saying that right. She has a great channel. She put this together and it's so involved. So Old School April is all about reading old stuff, which I mostly do here anyway, but I like to try to follow some of the prompts. I went on the sign-up sheet and signed up for my team, which I believe Cameron Chaney's on and E.D. Lewis. Anyway, I have some friends on that team, and I signed up for the Scoobies because, love Scooby-Doo. He's in here somewhere, Scooby, where are you? So I'll put together a very late TBR for my next video and come up with some things, just reading off my own shelves, because I have a lot of old school stuff here, which I'm sure I can dig into. So I decided, and I usually do this actually every year, but for Lent, which I observe every year, I gave up alcohol this year, which is something I usually give up for Lent. It's good to take a break from that. Not that I'm a big boozer, but you know, it's good to kind of reset your clock every once in a while. And I managed to get through, St. Patrick's Day and being in Boston without drinking, which is something of an accomplishment. I did have one slip with the Christian Brothers cognac one night. I think the cross on the outside of the bottle is what lured me in and made me feel like it was okay because it's good enough for the Christian Brothers. But anyway, I digress. So today I thought I would talk about some religious themed horror, which I pulled from my shelf, some examples of it, and also some things that I read recently. And some of the examples I've read and some I just have and have yet to read. So I thought I would talk about that a bit. One thing I have not given up for Lent, and I doubt if I can ever give up, is my caffeine habit. I got a beautiful latte right here from the Calm Waters coffee shop in my hometown. Lovely coffee shop, kind of become a hub of my town. And if you would like to support my caffeine habit, you can buy me a coffee, which helps support the channel, and it is linked below. It really helps to keep the lights on in here. As you can see, I've got some colored bulbs, and sometimes they get expensive when they burn out. Anyway, speaking of burnout, I read a new book that I did not like at all, but I thought I would give it a chance, and it is a religious-themed horror book. A warning, there will be spoilers a little bit about this book. It's called American Rapture by C.J. Lead, I guess is how the author's name is pronounced. And I had heard about this book. I had seen it being heavily promoted this past year, along with another book that I did not like at all, called Horror Movie, which I talked about. I don't want to go into too much of negativity with this, but I kind of went into it knowing that my friend James, with whom I do our podcast, which we're going to get back into, and Bookworms, we're gearing up for a new season of both of those things. He didn't like it. I think he ended up DNFing it. And so I kind of thought maybe I had some unconscious bias or some conscious bias going into this. But when I saw it at the library and it was like featured, it was like a featured pick on my library shelf, I thought, I'll give it a try. So it's about this Catholic girl, coming from a very strict Catholic upbringing. It's like Carrie's mother kind of thing, very religious. And she's being shamed for every impure thought, that kind of thing. We've seen this before. But she's living in, I think it's Wisconsin. And her father's an architect, and her parents are living in this modern home, which seems incongruous to this religious ideology for some reason for me. I don't know. I guess it's possible. And I have to say, these were not, as someone who was raised Catholic, I was a lapsed Catholic for many years, and then I returned to my faith. These people don't resemble any Catholics that I've ever been around. They seem more like evangelical Christians. Just saying, that kind of in-your-face preaching is not something I've been exposed to. I guess there are some Catholic sects that do that. I don't want to get into a religious discussion, please. No religion or politics, but just in a literary sense, it didn't feel authentic. Now, this author could have been raised Catholic, and look, religious trauma is a real thing, so I'm not commenting on that. But she got a few things wrong, like some of the language, like how a confession is done in a confessional. The language was incorrect in that. So, it's just something I noticed. So this book did not offend me because I'm a Catholic. It offended me because it was just really bad and overhyped. And I hold books that are professionally published to a higher standard than something that is like indie published. Because I know as an indie author myself, you're completely on your own. It's hard to get a really polished product. But this had professional editors and eyes on it, and it was still really subpar on every level. I hate to say it, it was just kind of dumb. It was a dumb book. I remember once seeing a documentary with Francis Ford Coppola about, it's the making of Apocalypse Now. It's a really great documentary. I forget what it's called, the documentary. I think his wife did it. Anyway, it's really good if you're interested in the creative process like I am. But in one point in this documentary, he said that his greatest fear was making a really shitty movie about a really important topic. And I feel that this book tried to take on like a world plague. Maybe she wrote it during COVID. I don't know. There were a lot of COVID books that came out around that time, but like a world plague, people are not just getting sick and dying, they're turning into sex-crazed zombies, which could be campy and cool in the right hands. But this was just dull and boring. One positive thing, I thought the start of the story was pretty well done. And there was one scene between mother and daughter in a dressing room at a department store, where the daughter she's developing, she's getting her breasts and her curves, and the mother is kind of shaming her, but we kind of get the idea of where the mother's coming from and why she's shaming her. Little backstory, which I thought, okay, that's cool. That shows a little bit of depth of character. But then once the plague starts, the girl comes home one day and her parents are having like raucous, violent sex on the living room floor. And then when they see her, they're going to do the same to her. This virgin child that they try to protect. And then she takes off she runs away, and she's still in her little Catholic uniform. It sounds like it could be campy, and if it had gone in more of like a campy direction, it would have been a lot better. But we're just kind of in this girl's head the whole time, and it's written in that really annoying present tense, which I don't like, with short, choppy sentences, and it just, like, I gaze out the window, I feel a tremor in my groin at the sight of a hot police officer on a motorbike. It's like that kind of thing. And it gets into some, like, I guess, some preachy messaging at some point that I just was rolling my eyes at. Yeah, so this book was not good in my opinion, but a lot of other people liked it because it got some pretty good ratings, and even some booktubers that I really respect thought it was great. So it could just be me. Again, this happens sometimes to me when I read newer stuff, so it's okay. I like religious themed books. I just don't like poorly written, shallow, and silly books. So one thing about this book that I thought actually had potential was in the midst of this plague, and as our heroine, her name's Sophie, discovers her sexuality along the way, surrounded by sex-crazed zombies, there is a group of the Catholics that band together, and they wear red robes like the Spanish Inquisition, and they go around to these different quarantine centers, which most of the story takes place in these very boring quarantine centers. Like, there's not a lot of action in this movie, in this book at all. They're called the Crusaders, and they run around in red robes, and they kill all the people who survived the plague because they're having sex, and that's bad. So I was going through my comic books looking for religious-themed comics, horror comics, and I found this one called The Exorcists. And I laughed because it is a Christian comic called The Crusaders. There are two Crusaders on the back. I had never heard of this comic, or I've never read them before, but I thought it was kind of funny after putting down this book that I picked this one up. So the Crusaders are Tim Clark and James Carter, two handsome gentlemen, and one is an ex-Green Beret. He met someone in the jungles of Vietnam who changed his life. And James Carter, ex-crime boss, he ruled the streets in Chicago until he met his match. I actually read this, and it had a much stronger plot than American Rapture. It's all about the Crusaders fighting, they go to exorcise a demonic boy in India while fighting communism. So that's the Crusaders. I kind of want to collect them all because I think it's really funny. Okay, so the next book I read this one first, is something that probably will interest none of you, but I found it in a thrift store, and I know about this author, and I started reading another one of his books, and I'm interested in the topic, and that is The Decline and Fall of the Roman Church by Malachi Martin. Malachi Martin is kind of a controversial figure. He was an Irish priest who joined the Jesuits. He was part of the Vatican. Apparently he helped to decode the Dead Sea Scrolls, I believe. Like, he worked on that, translating the Dead Sea Scrolls. He was an authority on language, and he's very, very intellectual. And it's refreshing to read something this intellectual sometimes, because it forces you to think on a higher level than certainly American Rapture. Okay, that's all I'm going to say about it. So this is basically the history of the Catholic Church. Oh, I say he was a controversial figure because he left the Jesuits. He had issues with Vatican II, which was the big change that happened in the Catholic Church from like the late 50s into the early 60s, where before that the Mass was said in Latin. I received a Latin baptism. As a really small child, we had an old Gothic style church, the kind that I prefer. And then because of Vatican II, all the churches a lot of the churches changed. The architecture changed into something more bright and welcoming and with pale blue carpets. And I was back in that church for my mother's funeral this summer, and I really hate that style of Catholic churches. Give me the old wood with the smell of Murphy's oil soap and incense and candles. That's the kind of church that inspires me and my Gothic soul. But anyway, back to Malachi Martin. He became controversial because he left the Jesuits and kind of left the church, but he was still considered a priest. I'm not really sure how that works. He wore like street clothes, and apparently had a lot of hot and heavy love affairs. So I'm sure he was busy at the confessional on Saturday. But an interesting character. I watched a good documentary about him. He became an exorcist when he moved to New York, and in a lot of ways capitalized on the craze that the book The Exorcist and the movie, of course, created. He hung out with the couple, was it the Warrens, who were part of the Amityville Horror hauntings, very famous couple. Also a controversial figure as being full of it, but I don't know. I think it's interesting to look into like demonology and stuff, which they did. But this book, it's really a pretty straight history. Like all good historians, he's a good storyteller. So he really beautifully dramatizes the scene where Pope Leo I meets Attila the Hun. It was sometime in the 5th century sometime. I don't remember the exact date. How they met each other at a river, and Attila the Hun had all of his soldiers, and they all had heads, severed heads on their pikes. And Leo I was on a humble donkey, and the two men spoke, and whatever the conversation was caused Attila the Hun to turn around and retreat. So it gets into like that, those kind of historical moments that created the Roman Empire and beyond. I got a little bored and started skimming through at some points because it just gets like heavy in kind of papal history, which wasn't that interesting. But overall, I did enjoy this, and I'm glad I read it. I do like reading history. He wrote another book, which I did not get that far into. I started it, but now I'm going to restart it. It's pretty darn dense. It's called Hostage to the Devil. It's not like The Exorcist or The Omen, because it's true. So you can see the marketing for this book was about that time. A true, awesome account of the possession and exorcism of 5 living Americans, documented by a former Jesuit. So this gets into real exorcisms, if you want to think they're real, I'm sure there's a lot of charlatans out there, but he makes a good case for it. And he apparently was, his last exorcism, and this sent chills, was of a very young girl. And this was in the documentary. And she gives him like the evil eye as they're pulling away in the car. There's like a whole story about this. And soon after, he was stepping on a step stool in his apartment to get a book off a high shelf. And he said it felt like someone just pulled the stool out from under him, and he fell and hit his head and died as a result. So yeah, it gets into a lot of interesting stuff. So this is a book that also deals with a religious theme of a young, innocent girl who is dealing with her sexuality and coming to grips with the fact that her grandmother is a religious fanatic. Her mother got pregnant at a young age as a result of rape. So the parents blamed the mother for this and kind of banished her. They kept the daughter, but they consider her like the spawn of evil. And this is by V.C. Andrews, or Andrew Niederman. I just picked this up at the library too. And it's so much better than American Rapture on every level. At least Andrew Niederman knows how to craft a story. This is called The Unwelcomed Child. About halfway through and enjoying that very much. So I wanted to talk a little bit about some other religious books, horror books I pulled from my shelf. Some I have read and some I haven't. This is a book, I want to leave this one out because I really want to read this. Robert McCammon is an excellent author. This one is called Baal. In the flames of lust and madness, the demon prince bestrides the earth. So I'm not just religious horror, but like demons and stuff I'm pulling out. But yeah, I've been wanting to read this. I've read a couple of his other books and he's really good. This one, actually, Batilda did a video about this a few years ago. This one's called Prime Evil by Ed Kelleher and Harriet Vidal, authors of The School, which I also read. This is like fun paperbacks from hell type of thing. Prime Virgins, Prime Cuts, Prime Horror, Prime Evil. So you can see, I read this stuff, and so does Batilda. We're not snobs about it. I just don't like things that are poorly written. All right, here's another one. Deliver Us from Evil by Alan Lee Harris. Only one boy can stop the devil from playing God. We've got devils, we've got demons. Here we have Julia Grishay, maybe? Cry for the Demon. I've had this book for a while. This is another paperback from hell. Out of the deep comes a terror no woman can resist. Provocative cover. This book I did read, and this is pretty good. This is called The Religion by Nicholas Conde. It's about a Santeria cult in New York City. The movie, which is really good, The Believers with Martin Sheen, is based on this book. So I read that a few years ago. I enjoyed that. This one is by Mason Burgess called Child of Demons, A Nightmare Lullaby. Sounds like a creepy kid horror. This one I have not read. This is called The Devil's Night by David Jacobs. I must have picked that up in a thrift store along the way. This one I did read a few years ago. This is Chet Williamson, Ash Wednesday. It's a good book for your Lenten read. And of course the Omen books are good classic religious horror. I started doing a playlist for watching the Omen, reading the Omen books last year and watching the movies. I didn't get that far because, I don't know, I got discouraged because YouTube kept blocking my videos. But anyway, I'll probably start reading them again. But we've got the Omen, of course, the beginning. Omen 2, Damien, which is actually a very good movie. We have The Final Conflict, which wasn't exactly The Final Conflict because now we also have Armageddon 2000. I haven't read the last two books. I think that's it. Yeah, the Omen books are always a great religious read, as are, of course, The Exorcist and Carrie by Stephen King. And to finish it off, I'm sure I have more books that fit the bill, but these are the ones I could find right away. And I do like this author a lot. This is Edward Lee's Infernal Angel. Edward Lee is, I guess he's considered kind of a splatterpunk extreme horror writer, but just campy enough for me to really enjoy. And then this one is a nonfiction book called Devil's Knot, The True Story of the West Memphis Three by Mara Leverett, which I have not read yet. I got into this story back when the documentary came out and really followed it and was very intrigued by it, but I'd like to read this book. I'm not really sure at what point this is part of their investigation in the whole legal thing, but yeah, I love true crime. Religious themes are right for horror and drama, especially the Catholics. Let's not forget. So let me know in the comments below what your favorite religious horror books or movies are, or if you're planning on doing Old School April, something a little more wholesome. I'd love to hear your thoughts. So before I leave today, I'm just going to end my video with a little vlog of my trip to Boston, and you can see my mystery booktuber at the Bristol bookstore. So thanks for stopping by, and I will see you next time in my haunted library. Bye. So here we are on a trip to Boston, taking the train. It was lovely mist going on. Got this beautiful room with this fabulous view of the city. And of course, we did a little sightseeing. We went to the Oyster House, had delicious clam chowder, and walked around a bit, checking out the sights, and of course a lot of cemeteries. I love these old cemeteries, these old slate gravestones. I found a Regina pizzeria, and look who we ran into at the Bristol bookstore. Hi, Steve. Can you give us a little tour here?
This is the Bristol sale book. This is my
Okay. Home. How often do you come here, do you think?
Once a week.
Once a week, okay. So after getting a little tour from Steve, and I started getting a little chilly, I decided to go indoors and check out what was happening inside, and I did manage to find the horror section. They had some pretty standard stuff, Stephen King. Later, we did a little more sightseeing, and of course, more graveyards, and this very cool Gothic building. I'm not really sure what it is anymore. There was this strange brutalist building across the street from us, which I was fairly fascinated with. And here's the book that I got at the Bristol, just one. I didn't want to load up my suitcase too much, but this is a biography of Bram Stoker, which I thought was pretty cool. And we finished our trip back at the Oyster House for a slice of Boston cream pie.